Really happy to be here and back associated with the Pine River Institute. I will share my screen, and we're hoping that technology is kind to us tonight and everything works smoothly. But obviously, let Marion know if it doesn't. I likely won't be looking at the chat. I'll be super focused. So let's begin. I will share my screen with you. So you just heard all of those fancy titles. So let's get into what is this really about for us tonight. And so there's so many ways that we can go and so many roads to the same destination. But what I've tried to focus on is, why is it so difficult to resolve or help or assist in problem behaviors? What are some causes of problem behaviors? Some caregiver tasks and skills that we can think about and some tips for those, and then a Q&A. And of course, this is not intended to be exhaustive in any way, but really a starting point for this. So I wanted to begin by showing you a clip of Marsha Linehan, who really created DBT therapy in the 1980s. And her therapy, which I also practice, and it's also a model used at the campus, the skills group, and some of the DBT principles. And she really talks a little bit about why it's hard and the approaches she took as she began. So I'm going to stop share and hopefully I will be able to reshare again with you online and we'll listen to her.
What happened was standard behavior therapy of the 1970s and early 1980 blew up. And the main reason it did is because behavior therapy is a technology of change. And what it requires for it to work is for a person to come in and you be able to say, okay, here's the problem and here's what we'll do to change it. And for the person to say, okay, I'll try that. But the people I was dealing with immediately said, you're saying I'm the problem. And so they were so sensitive to any invalidation or statement that they were the problem that the treatment blew up. And they would either get angry at me, hide behind a chair, storm out, quit therapy, yell and scream, cry, or say they're going to kill themselves. So it didn't take me too long to figure out this was not going to work out. So I thought, okay, we're going to switch to a more acceptance-based treatment. So I'm going to validate and be very accepting. Really like a Rogerian therapy, sort of a client-centered Rogerian therapy. So I tried that. That blew up also because then the patient said, you mean you're not going to help me? You're just going to listen to me? Most of the patients I treat have already been through a whole lot of therapy where you talk, get listened to, and understood. The problem is talking, being listened to, and being understood doesn't necessarily make anything change. So then they got really upset with me because I wasn't helping them change. So I said, oh, okay. So that's when I realized that I had to pull together major emphasis on change with a technology of acceptance. So I had a technology of change, and I needed a technology of acceptance. The technology of acceptance primarily was validation. That's the primary acceptance treatment strategy used. So it's behavior therapy with a huge amount of validation. So problem-solving, validation are the core components of the treatment.
Okay. So, as she says, I'm pretty sure most of us who have parented or been caregivers have found ourselves stuck. We use behavioral techniques like punishment or reinforcement, and that doesn't seem to change or it gets us so far. And then we also use things like validation and trying to build relationship, but that on its own doesn't work either. And so if I always go back to someone like Marsha Linehan, who has devoted her life to trying to find a way forward with very difficult and problematic behaviors, if she's struggling, it kind of makes it okay for me to struggle too. So let's look at this in a little bit more detail. So problematic behaviors and what your choices are is, well, number one, solve it. Fix it, change it, or leave. I find this works really well with inanimate objects, things like toasters or objects around your home. You can fix them, you can go get a new one, or you can, I guess, throw it out or do something like that. But unfortunately, it doesn't really tend to work quite so well with people, and especially our children. They don't want to be fixed or they don't want to change, and we can't really leave. That's not really an option we generally have. We can, but it tends to be an extreme one. So then the second choice we kind of had is feel better about it. Can we distract ourselves? Maybe we avoid it because it's really difficult. Or we can change our emotional responses to it, and that can be helpful. So there are some things here that can be helpful, but they're probably not going to help solve the whole thing. We can also choose to tolerate it. We're just going to put up with it. I'm going to accept whatever the behavior is. I'm also going to accept the way that I respond to it. And that's just where we're going to be. But as Marsha Linehan was saying earlier, that doesn't always get you very far. In fact, it can get you stuck. Or you can stay upset or make it worse. You sit in it. So, okay, well, we're going to have to find a way forward that maybe harnesses some parts of this and other parts of that. So, how much influence do we have as caregivers? And one of the things I go back to time and time again when I'm working with people is you get 100% of your 50 because you're in a relationship with someone. So you can be the most gold star, angelic, biggest student, most amazing caregiver on the planet, and you still only get 50% of that relationship. And so if the other person in that relationship is not giving anything at all, it's impossible to move forward. And I think it's a really important thing for us to remember as parents because we have a lot of history with our children that we were able to control quite a bit more when they were smaller, but things have now changed as they grow. So, yes, we can have a lot of influence, but not overwhelming. And the more relationship type influence we have, obviously, the more helpful that is. So, Jody, I see you raised your hand. I'm going to keep going just because we have a Q&A at the end, and hopefully that will address or pop your question into the chat. And we'll make sure we get to you. So another principle that's important to know is all behavior is caused, right? Behavior doesn't just happen. It's not just there. It's all caused by something, both our own and our children's. And so, in this little sort of cartoon that I have on here by Lindsay Bramham, who is an excellent illustrator, by the way, of many mental health things, it talks about how healthy brains search out trying to get their needs met. And I don't know about anyone else. I am a child of the 70s and 80s, showing my age here. But it was very much taught to me as a caregiver of just ignore the bad behavior and it'll go away. Well, even if we're lucky enough that it does go away, the underlying need is still there and we didn't meet it. And the problem with that is then our children can turn that on themselves and start blaming themselves and making a story up about what actually happened. And so really the key thing, and it's the key thing in all of my therapy, is figuring out the cause of the behavior and then beginning to work on and change that using the cause as the thing that is helping us is just more effective every single time than judging or blaming. And whether that's judging and blaming yourself for not being a good enough parent or caregiver, or judging or blaming your child, we can do those things and we do those things. But generally, if we want to help manage these behaviors and understand them, the most effective way to do that is to understand what's causing them. Okay, so what are some causes of problematic behavior? Trauma, as you can imagine, developmental and other types of trauma are a really huge cause of problematic behavior because people feel desperate and they try any way they can to feel better. But the biggest thing for us as caregivers to know is that children are very vulnerable to our own stress and our own trauma. Because when a parent is overstressed or overwhelmed or traumatized, the child is not able to look at their caregiver and say, oh, it's because they had something happen, or it's because something awful happened to them, or there's something happening in their lives. Because children are egocentric, it's always about them. So they can't help that. That's just the way they're designed. And the younger, the more stronger it is. And so they're like, oh, it's me. There's something wrong with me. And so children will blame themselves for the most diverse set of situations and circumstances that you can imagine. And when we hear their stories, they sound like crazy making stories to us because there's no rationale about them. But these children and adolescents are very passionate about the stories they've created. Other causes are things like learning disabilities or differences in brain wiring. Being a neurodivergent person in a world that is not set up for you is not helpful. Being non-able bodied in an able-bodied world is not easy. And so again, children and adolescents tend to blame themselves for these problems, even if they are lucky enough to get a diagnosis and some access to resources. And so that can cause problematic behavior, as well as just not having the skill to be able to behave in a social or culturally informed way because cues are missed or there's a difficulty in regulation. Attachment disruption, and I've named a few here. Adoption's very close to my heart as an adoptee, and really the problematic behavior doesn't necessarily come from the process itself. It can come from very, very early on. And so, for example, these days we know that children who are given up for adoption are grown within parents who are very stressed. And it's a stressful experience, even if it's absolutely the right choice. And their parent has resolved themselves that that's the right choice, it's a stressful experience. So we know that biologically, children tend to be more exposed in the womb to stress chemicals, which can help to impede brain development. And at the same time, when that child is born, they are removed from the entire soundtrack of their lives thus far. So the heartbeat they've come to rely on as their sort of background noise, their safety, and the voice disappears and is replaced by another. Now, that's nobody's fault. That is just the way it is. But for a very tiny nervous system, it codes that as threat and it goes into fight flight. So there can be really big impacts on the nervous system of a very, very tiny infant, even when the adoption happens at birth and everybody is agreed within it. So these are some of the kind of biological environmental impacts that help to calibrate a nervous system that might be more inclined to go off quickly or struggle with emotional regulation. These are some of the earliest causes. These are hopefully a little bit more obvious ones, things like bullying and social and race discrimination. Intersectionality, for those who are not aware, was a term coined by Kimberly Crenshaw in the late 1980s when she experienced trying to take her employer to court for discriminating against her. And she was told she had to choose between being discriminated against as being Black or being discriminated against as a woman. She could not have both. And of course, both were factors at play. And so she coined this term intersectionality to represent that if you have one or other of these different causes of either a lack of privilege or accessibility, they start to compound and cause a real problem. And then our response to it can become problematic. Parenting, caregiving, of course, parenting and caregiving styles, our own health, which is extremely traumatic if our children see that we're not well because they rely on us for their survival, whether they like us or not, they rely on us. Our own maturity, emotional, neurological, cognitive. If there's a divorce or separation, again, sometimes that's the healthiest choice for a family, but it's disruptive for a child. And then the resources, financial, emotional, physical resources that parents have, depending on their situation. The child's temperament and its match to a family. This is a big one in terms of behavioral things that we see. So if you are an introvert and your family is extrovert, you can feel very judged and very alone. And likewise, if you live in a family of introverts and you happen to be an extrovert, you can also judge yourself. So there's no one to blame here, but it's a source of difficult behaviors on the one that doesn't fit so well. And we're in Canada. This is a big immigration country. I'm an immigrant myself. All of our varied immigration experiences and history, they can be causes of problematic behavior, both from perhaps a trauma or a displacement lens, but also for parents who might have different cultural expectations of their children, depending on their host country. And those children growing up in a Canadian environment and feeling that they need to fit in there and what that cultural norm is. And so there's a disparity between the two, and that can be confusing. And finally, the physical and mental health challenges for all of us, including COVID-19, which was such a big factor for all of us in raising anxiety, unpredictability, and uncertainty. And of course, as children progress through the school system, depending on their experiences within that or their family experiences within that, that is a big factor. So I wanted to share example with you all to try and illustrate what I'm talking about when we look at what are the causes of the behavior rather than looking at trying to deal with the behavior itself, which we also have to do, but what is the most effective way that we can understand these behaviors? And so I chose an example of shouting in anger because I figured that, people have awareness of that whatever there is they might feel. And this can be deemed a problem behavior. Now, of course, if your cultural norm is that everybody shouts and it's a big, loud family, like I said, with that match, then it might not be a problem. But I picked it just to show an example. And what I tend to find, I don't know whether this is the same for all of you, is people are very aware of two of the quadrants on this board. And I'll start with the first one, which really most children could tell you. If I'm a child that I shout in anger, I can tell you that people get upset when I do it. Now, I can also see whether I'm an adult or a child that people can shout back. It escalates the situation. Or people shut down. It damages relationships. And sometimes I'll say things I don't mean because I'm so angry. I get overtaken. The cons of shouting in anger is something that you can be illuminated in many, many different ways and told in many ways. Don't shout at me, all of these kinds of things. So most people are aware of the cons of it, whether they do it or not. The next thing, they know is, yeah, why should I stop? Why is it a good idea to stop? Well, I won't damage the relationships as much. This is relative of the cons. People might listen. Maybe I don't feel so out of control. And if you're an adult, you'll know that will de-escalate the situation. And so, again, if I am someone who shouts in anger, I'll be told, I can't listen to you when you're shouting. These are things that become obvious to people. So when I'm working with people and we're trying to get to the heart of what is a problem behavior, I'm much more interested in these next two. And they're ones that aren't given as much attention in the general wider world. The first is, why do I like it? What does it do for me? Well, shouting discharges a huge amount of energy. It's not for no reason that anger is often seen in my world as a secondary emotion. It's actually not the emotion people are feeling at all, but it's the emotion you see expressed. So I might be sad or overwhelmed, but I shout. And, in the gender roles, men and males in particular are generally pushed towards expressing themselves in anger rather than expressing themselves in sadness or overwhelm. And so it discharges a lot of energy. It gives me a way to get rid of some of all of this feeling I have inside. I can feel big. I can feel powerful when I shout. It gives me relief, right? It calms me down, basically. People listen. Now, it's not the same listening as listening to hear it, but I get people's attention and people notice me. And being seen and heard are two fundamental things that all of us need as human beings. Now, I'm sure we can all agree this is not the most effective way to do it, but it is a way to do it. So these are powerful things that are actually getting satisfied by this behavior. And then I want to look at what will I lose if I stop? And it's obviously in the same way similar. I'm going to lose feeling powerful. I might not want to give that up. Maybe the only time I feel powerful is when I shout, because the rest of the time I feel powerless. I'm going to start bottling up feelings that I don't know what to do with. I don't know any other way to communicate that I'm not okay. I'm just not that sophisticated. I can't do that. Don't have the emotional language. Nobody notices me or I'm ignored. That's an extraordinarily difficult thing. So when we can understand these pros and these cons for the person that's involved in, and in DBT therapy and others do it in a similar way, we're looking at that so that we can help identify, well, if my need is to discharge energy, I have to find an alternative way to do that that isn't shouting before I'll be willing to give up the shouting. So we're looking at how can we problem solve some more effective ways to get these needs met and not have the losses associated with the loss of the problematic behavior before we let go of it, because that's a barrier in a way. And then the other thing that I would mention is I've done this kind of pros and cons list basing on the internal experience, but there are external reinforcers that, we do sometimes unwittingly. And so maybe if somebody, I've had children who have become unwell, mentally unwell, and they have a fear of getting better because they feel, don't forget, this is their story that they made up, that they're only actually noticed by their parents when they're not doing well. And so they don't want to get better because they're afraid they won't be noticed. And so anytime a problematic behavior happens, maybe they say, oh, I'm feeling really unwell and oh, I feel desperate. I can't go to school. I can't do all of these things. If as caregivers, we pay a great deal of attention to that, it's very difficult not to. We're unconsciously reinforcing that belief that they have. So without knowing that's a belief, I'm going to reinforce that belief. But if I understand what it is, then I can also, as an external person, be more assistive in moving us all forward. Okay, hopefully you're all still with me. I'm keeping an eye on the time. So this graphic from Echo Parenting and Education, they've got some great graphics on a lot of trauma and parenting, really represents more than and some of the things that I have named. And the key thing is, it's a little bit like an iceberg with the behavior. Right at the bottom there, it's like, how is the problem that we see the child or the adolescent's solution? Because it is one. And even the most incomprehensible, damaging, dangerous behavior that I have worked with children and adolescents on is a solution and started life as a solution. And of course, it's got out of hand. And of course, it's not helpful. And of course, it's dangerous. But until I work out why they're doing it and what they're trying to solve, I can't start looking at healthier ways to address it. And so all of these tabs that you see here are different things that contribute, such as their nervous system fight flight. It's a coping strategy they learned early. We see that a lot in substance use. Some structural changes in the brain that could capture some neurodivergence, or a basic human need that they haven't learned how to ask for in a healthy way. So all of that comes together. Okay, so let's switch caregiver skills. What can we do? How can we be helpful? Well, there's a couple of things we can do. One is to go back to Marsha Lennon's introduction here, which is to balance acceptance and change and allow opposing points of view to both be true, and creating safety, being as attuned as we're able, and containment of our children. And I know that at Pine River, there's a lot of focus on those things for good reason. So acceptance and change comes from the idea that I can accept, remember, acceptance is not approval. That is a key thing. I'm not saying it's fine. I'm not saying I approve. I'm saying I can accept this is where we are. That's a very different thing. And at the same time as accepting where we are, I'm noting that we have to change. So these can be seen as dialectics, as it's called in dialectical behavior, or opposite things both being true. And in my world of therapy and also my own lived experience, I've found that truth is mostly plural. There are many perspectives and many truths in every situation. So we can accept what is in front of us, and the need for work, change, and evolution. Okay, I can accept that you are trying your best. I see it. I can see you trying your best. And we're going to need to try harder. It's going to have to find a way to do better. And we'll look at that together. We'll find a way. We validate what's valid and the need for accountability. So I can say to someone who's behaving in a big, loud way, I can understand why you're so upset. That mattered to you a great deal. And you can't smash other people's things. So you have to look at a way. But I go in with the validation first because I'm saying, I see you. I see your distress and I understand your distress and the way you're expressing it. We can't keep working with that. We can accept that we didn't cause all our problems that we have, and we have to deal with them. And this is especially true for those who've suffered from abuse, or those who are dealing with neurodivergence or non-able bodied. Didn't cause those problems, and I have to deal with them if I'm going to navigate the world as it is, not the world that I'd like it to be. It's not fair. And we have choices to move forward. And we go back to that slide at the beginning of those choices that we have. Some may be more tempting than others, but we do have choices, even though it is not fair. And for caregivers, I want to manage my child and I need for them to be independent. This is a difficult one. I need to manage and keep them safe, but I can't do that forever because I can't be with them 24/7. It's never going to work. And so we have these opposing pulls as a caregiver. And I'm trying my best as a caregiver and noticing that, not having an endless, I need to do better. If we're going to ask our children, our adolescents, and our young adults to accept themselves where they're at and support them to get better, then there's no faster way they'll disregard that than if I don't give it to myself. Because what they'll say is, you're saying it, but you don't mean it. As much as we watch what our children do, our children watch us closely. They know that if I say, oh, yes, I do accept that you're trying your best and you need to do better. And then I say, I do that for me too. And they know that's not true. All I do is beat myself up. Then I'm going to lose credibility. And that's important for relationship. Safety is obviously a big thing. And the biggest thing that we can say about it is if somebody is outside of their safe zone, which is represented in that's image to the left there, they can't hear. They'll hear words, but they won't digest them. They can't learn because their bodies have said there's something more important to pay attention to. There's a threat. And our bodies and our nervous system work in such a way that once threat has been identified, it shuts down those more complicated thinking structures. So we can't plan and strategize and digest so well what we're hearing and what's going on. And we also have physical impacts to that. And so if somebody is dysregulated, if somebody is really activated and in the middle of their behavior, it doesn't matter if I came up with the most insightful, helpful phrase of my life. They're not going to hear it. They're not going to be able to access it. So safety has the power to undo all of our hopes and all of our learning. And so that's why we have to attend to it. And it's environmental, of course, it's physical, and it's emotional. If I'm encouraging my child to share their feelings with me, and they do, and I go up in flames about it, or say, well, you shouldn't feel that way, or why are you angry? That's not fair. I didn't do anything, or whatever it might be, I've just lost them. It isn't safe for them to share their feelings with me. So I've got to be careful about what I say. And if things are unsafe, I think it's incredibly helpful to name that and say, I understand that right now it's probably this is not the place to have the conversation, or you're not feeling like you're safe enough with me right now. And that's a humbling thing. But I have said it as a therapist with clients who have been triggered with me. I'll understand that they don't feel safe enough with me in that moment. And so all we work on is getting back to that safe place. We don't try and do anything else. So that's important to know, obviously. And then attunement, which you can think about it like a radio, tuning in to the same frequency as your child, adult, young adult, whoever. And it means being fully present. So seeing them, right? I read you, I'm seeing you, and I'm present with you. I may not understand completely what's going on, but I'm really trying to, and I'm fully engaged in that moment. It's hard. It's really hard. And it's especially hard when it's a child, and it's especially hard when you're in the middle of problematic behavior, right? But it's a dynamic process. And so if I'm listening and I'm observing, one of the easiest ways to do that, if you are genuinely trying to get to it, is to say, okay, so you've just told me that you want me to see you. And the way I can do that is to listen to what you're saying. And I think what you just said was da da da. Did I get that? Never do that if you're not tuned in. If you're trying to mirror what they said and you're not really attuned because you're too tired, and we'll talk about reasons that get in the way, they'll sense that you're not really there. If there's one thing we know when people are dialed in with us and we know when they're dialed out. It's like an inherent thing that we have inside ourselves that we're aware of. And so that phone down at the bottom there, it's a big problem because once we're on our phones, we're not paying attention. None of us are. And I'm sure all of you have had an experience of being with either your child or your partner or whomever, even at work, and someone's checking their text or they're saying, yeah, yeah, and they're doing something else. Well, that's one thing at work, but when I'm trying to have a conversation with somebody who is important to me, have to learn to put that down. And I may be asking them to do the same because it's just impossible to do. Okay, I'm going to go past this slide because I just don't want the time to take, and I can speak about it. But we'll move on to a containment for now. So I want to make sure we have plenty of time for questions. So containment is also difficult depending on your own nervous system and how it goes. So it's, and you'll see these are Lindsay Bramham's illustrations, which I like. I just like the cat in the box because it can't have, we need space, but we need some boundaries and structure around it. And so again, this is something that Pine River I know works a lot with, and I work a lot with caregivers and their children is how can I say no and have some boundaries when the behaviors are so big and they're so difficult? And it just feels easier to give way, partly because I might be afraid, or, there's lots of reasons that that could be a problem. And we'll talk about those in the next slide. But we need that feeling of being held, right? And not fragilizing our children, our adolescents, our partners, that they won't be able to hear it. Now, there's one thing if they're big towards us, but it's another if we are thinking, oh, they're not going to manage it. And the reason that it takes courage and wisdom and boundaries is everybody's different. Everybody has a slightly different boundary. Those boundaries and the wisdom to put them in are informed by our entire histories. I often say that as adults, we carry around like a huge reference library with us of everything we've been through and everything we know. And that informs all the choices that we make. And especially as an immigrant, I'm bringing my cultural choices in and my cultural expectations. And I'm going to hold boundaries for those that may or may not align with Canadian norms, which is then going to start with my child to be difficult. And so how do we do this? How do we hold space for that? And part of that containment to the other slide of attunement is saying, which I definitely have as a caregiver and parent to my children, I said, listen, I know you want to speak to me, and it is really important. But I know if I try and speak to you right now, I'm so exhausted. I'm just not going to be present. I can't give you the attention that this deserves. And I think you're just going to get annoyed with me. Can you give me 15 minutes? I just need to go and eat something, get a cup of tea because I'm British, and just get my head round the day. And anytime I've not done that and I've been overwhelmed or I've been tired, it's ended in a shouting match because it just didn't have the bandwidth to really be present. And so part of this is knowing what my own boundaries are and what I can give. And then saying to my child, here's what you can have, and I'm going to give it to you. And I'm not just going to say, I can't talk to you right now, I'm too tired. I'm going to give you a future time and a future placeholder for it, because that's going to help them hold and wait because they're able to know that it's coming. And then we have to, of course, keep our word on that, no matter where we're at. And so there's a couple questions there just to, for your own reflection of thinking about the level of attunement and containment you got when you were at home or you were in school, and whether it was a match for what you wanted or not. And then think about any siblings if you had them, and would that have been the same? Did they need a tighter container? Did they need more attunement? Or do you think they needed less, or you needed less? And it's really just to illustrate the point that this is a very, very personal process, depending on all of our own nervous systems and our children's and all of our life experiences. And what gets in the way of containment are the things which I don't think will surprise you, but are understandable, and that we have to be, if we can, compassionate with ourselves. We're dysregulated. And that is up to us to know. Yes, people may read me, they may know me well, they may know when I am not okay, dysregulating as I'm accessible, I'm grounded, I'm in that safety zone. But I know I'm not. And so if I'm not, it's on me to decide what I do with that and how I take care of that before I try anything with my child or my partner. We get caught up in the behavior. What it actually is really hooks us in, and we just focus on that. We're not able because it causes us problems to see it, and we're not able to see past it to the cause. We get stuck on what's actually happening, which is entirely understandable. We might be uncomfortable with our child's emotional response. Depending on your own comfort, you might feel more comfortable with anger than you do with sadness, or it might be the opposite. We're all different. And I know that I can speak from personal experience that anger has been the biggest learning I've had to do, because I found it very threatening. I actually have three boys and they tower over me. So they look big and threatening when they're angry too. And so I have had to do some work as a caregiver to become comfortable with that so that my issues with it aren't the thing that derails us. As I say, that's me doing my 100% of my 50. How can I be part of the solution here? And of course, my children also need to. We want to be a friend or we want to be liked. It's very distressing to not have a good relationship with your child. It can feel awful. It can be a whole body experience when your child is upset with you, say awful things like they hate you, you haven't seen them, they won't talk to you, they're not accessible. These are the closest people in our lives. And when they are disconnected from us, our bodies code it as huge threat and make us really feel uncomfortable. And one of the ways we can get around that is by dropping it and becoming their friend and saying, oh, okay. But of course, that's a problem in terms of boundaries and containment. And it subtly reinforces that actually, if they push us hard or they ignore us for long enough or they're mean to us, maybe they can get what they want. And we don't want to be externally reinforcing if we can help it. We're in an immediate emergency. We don't have time to think or plan. And that's okay. And we do the best that we can do. And then once that is over, we go back to doing the containment we can do. And maybe we go back and acknowledge because of how that happened, I didn't react in a way I wanted to. And this is why. Split parenting and caregivers, I can do this with mom, but not with that mom. So, it's how do we get split between that's always going to get in the way of a consistency, and consistency is what we're trying to aim for. So, okay, all of that's a lot. What are some tips for effectiveness that I can share with you, hopefully, along with the other things you may have picked up? Watch your own regulation. It's the biggest tool, really, that you can have. What is your body and what is your voice communicating? Because our children respond to the thing that they feel that we've got, not what we're saying necessarily. So they're listening to our body tone, they're listening to our body tone, our tone of voice and our body language. They're really tuned in. And this is where I would say strike while the iron is cold. It's very, very difficult to be in the middle of a crisis situation and be completely calm. And in fact, if we are able to be so, it's mostly because we are either in a freeze response or shut down. So we're actually not really present. So watching our own regulation, learning how we can get back to a nice grounded space or at least away from the brink. These are really helpful tools that we can all do. And there's lots of tools online for soothing that can help you do that. And they're like any skill, practice really helps. Relationship. Any chance you get to build a relationship keeps you relevant and with a voice with your child. And that is hugely important. And while you still have a voice, you still have influence of your 50%, which you need and they need from you. So one of the things you can do is notice and name whatever the small success is. And that is effective. Sometimes you can say at the end of the day, rather than saying, how was school? How did it go? Et cetera, you can say, okay, name a small success today. And it could be as I went to school. It could be anything small. I remembered an umbrella and it was raining. But it gets in the habit of noticing the positive things and building a conversation that isn't about behavior, isn't about school. It's about how we feel and it's positive. Try and normalize not approving of abnormal behavior with clear limits. So with the shouting, I can say, hey, I can see that by shouting, it gets you heard and you feel unheard and unseen. So I can see how that would make sense. That I should maybe making sense would be a better way to say this. And XYZ, whatever your limits are. So we're trying to get away from focusing on what you're actually doing to the heart of why it's a problem. All feelings are welcome, all behaviors are not. And that's the reality of the world we live in. So the more that we can teach that and embody it, the more helpful it will be. Age appropriate conversations talking about that push pull, acceptance and change, how I do accept that this is where we are now, and I know that we need to change and move forward. That can be helpful. It's not a kind of instinctive thing. So if we educate ourselves in it, then we can actually say, and that helps us when we're with a child or an adolescent or a young adult who says, I think this, and I can think, well, I think that. And we can perhaps allow both those perspectives to be true. And you know what? There's going to be one that we go with. If possible, narrate to help verbal communication. You get behavior when it's beyond somebody's ability to put it in words. And for that, we can say, okay, I can see that this was hugely important to you, and that's why you're so upset. What we're doing is we're kind of coaching so that they can then, yes, this is hugely important to me. And so maybe at some point they'll be able to say, but it was so important to me, rather than choosing the behavior and validating what is valid first so that we're like, I see you. It was really important before we go to the corrective. I put this one in because we can get stuck in power struggles with our children, particularly as they get older. You've won. You really have won. Our children and our adolescents do not generally have the means to support themselves in the fashion, food, shelter, all of those things that we are able to provide for them, never mind all the relationship and treats and Wi-Fi and phones and, everything from the material to the relationship. So anytime that you're feeling yourself getting hooked in by a power struggle of, no, you will respect me, you'll do what I want, which clash, know that you've already won and try and bring that to help you with your own regulation, because otherwise we get concerned about who's right rather than what's helpful. Get help and support as needed. Mention SashBear here. SashBear do some free DBT groups for parents and caregivers, and there are many, many resources in the Greater Toronto area, as well as so many online resources now, so that you don't feel alone. One of the biggest loves that I have and continue to have when I look back is the parent community at Pine River. What an amazing community I was privileged to be a part of. And I remember every one of those parents, I guarantee you, and the admiration and support that they gave each other and the way in which they moved through. It's such a powerful dynamic. So if you can find community, do. It will help you feel less alone. Okay, so I will stop there.